Alright.
We're taking all the best old school wisdom and blending it with the top new school methods to bring you the optimal coaching strategies. This is the 80-20 Baseball Podcast with Coach Bo.
Welcome to this week's get-together. We got a good one today. We have part one of our interview with Coach Tommy Hansen. Coach Hansen is a strength and conditioning coach that works with athletes at all levels, but specializes in coaching youth athletes. And a big part of that is coaching up youth baseball players, getting them more athletic, getting them stronger so they can play better out on the field. So we'll dive into part one of that interview today. But first, a couple quick items. Here's a tip to help the continuity of your team. More specifically, how to help speed up the learning curve, the growth of your team, of your players, by doing two things. One, we've touched on a little bit before, but I want to reiterate it because of the importance, and that is using the same terminology across the board, having the coaching staff use the same terminology, especially on those key points that come up a lot, those key items that are coached up a lot, and definitely with those items that players aren't that familiar with, items that the players don't have a lot of context on, new items, and definitely the big items. So using the same terminology, an example would be for pitching, there's a relatively new term called the hip hinge or hinging. Before that, it was known as sitting or sinking on that back leg. Doesn't really matter what you call it. It's a great thing to coach up, but just make sure that you use the same terminology. Do you want to call it a hitting approach or hitting plan? Just decide on that beforehand and use the same terminology for those big items and anything that the players might have very limited context on. So we've talked about that a little bit, but I want to reiterate that as some of you are getting in the fall ball, this is a time to make sure your terminology is lined up. Now, how you coach it up, that's going to adjust throughout the season and the year as you improve as a coach and your players improve. But the terminology should stay very consistent, not only with ourselves as we use it with our players, but with all the coaches that are giving input to our players, our team, and our own kids. So be cognizant of that. Here's another thing that we can do as coaches to speed up the growth, the learning curve with our players. You might consider before a season starts, whether that's fall ball or definitely spring ball, the spring season, if you have, and hopefully you do, multiple coaches that will consistently show up to practice, multiple parents that will show up and help out, it's not a bad idea to have the same assistant coach / parent coach up the same facet of the game or be the primary coach of a certain facet, a specific area of the game throughout the season. That doesn't mean other coaches can't give input, but if one coach is coaching up one area, of course, with the input on the side and post-practice discussions, side chats, input coming from other coaches, this can help the continuity of the message, the coaching message. So say, all right, Coach Joe, you're going to coach pitchers. Coach Bob, you're going to coach the hitters. Coach Joe, you're going to be the primary pitching coach. Coach Bob, you're going to be the primary hitting coach. Coach Chuck, you're going to be the primary outfield coach, et cetera, et cetera. If a coach feels more confident in a certain area or has good drills or better drills than the other coaches for a specific part of the game, maybe that's how you divvy it up. If there's no previous knowledge or expertise across the board from the coaches, then I recommend splitting it up and having a primary coach for each area. If possible, I recommend trying that strategy, having a primary coach for each area. Now, if you only got one coach, then you can't do it. But if you got multiple coaches, maybe for the big items, hitting, pitching, those would be the two biggest, maybe infield and outfield play or base running. Think about that. I know it's not as easy to do for youth baseball, but at a minimum, let's keep the messaging, the same terminology should be used consistently with the team. Nick Saban was a big fan of this. Nick Saban was a big fan of this. Was a big deal for him and his program and his team. It was one of the main priorities, and I think at the end of the day, it all makes sense. So keep that in mind as you get out to the field, as you start the season, or as you prepare for the upcoming spring season. Moving on to this next item, I received an email from a coach, you know who you are, with regard to motivating players, 8 to 12-year-olds. And the coach was finding that the players, some of the players, not all, but some of the players just didn't seem motivated to play the entire day of games. It was a 4 games in one day environment. It was a hot day. And some of the kids mentioned that they just want to go home and how this can be discouraging for the coach, the coaching staff, and the other half of the team that wants to win. I would say this, and I'm always going to be honest here up front, and you take it how you take it. I would avoid playing 4 games in a day. In fact, I would avoid playing more than 2 games in a day. So that might mean avoiding tournaments that will have 4 games in a day. I worry about the burnout from a lot of the players, not all the players. Some of the players will play day and night, but it's definitely not the majority of kids, especially not today when they have so many other options. You want to leave them wanting more. I'm not saying physically they can't play 4 games, and I'm not saying they shouldn't be tough enough to play 4 games. I'm sure kids 100 years ago at 12 years old were doing jobs, working in mines, working farms, 16-hour days that would make playing a youth baseball game look like a walk in the park or a day at the beach. And I get that. Just be careful with this. Now, I'm working on a scrimmage guide that lays out the steps, the specific steps and rules for a scrimmage that all of you coaches can use to get 4 games worth of baseball. 4 games if you're playing an opponent, 4 games worth of baseball. So let's say it's 24 innings. If it's 6-inning games, you could get 24 innings doing an intra-squad game, which would be a 12-inning game because you're playing yourself. How you could get a 12-inning game, the same amount of outs, everything done in the time it would take you to play a game and a half, at most 2 games. That could be done in about a third of the time. You're going to shave off half the time just by playing against yourself. And there's proven ways that I put out and lay out and list out in the scrimmage guide that'll be available soon. I'll let you know when it's available. You'll be the first to know here on the podcast. And if you follow these steps, you could play 4 games worth of baseball. Let's say each game is an hour and 45 minutes, which comes out to 7 hours. So that's a total of 7 hours of game time for 4 games. Doing an intra-squad scrimmage, you could knock that to 3.5 inherently. You could shave off another 30 minutes to an hour, no problem, by doing it a certain way that I've done many a times with teams. I'd consider doing it that way. As we try to get our players better and also have fun, it's not about the amount of games they play. It's about the amount of at-bats they get, the innings played on defense, pitching, the amount of times on base. That's what's important. Kids aren't going to be pumped up to say, I played 4 games, as much as they're going to be pumped up to say, I got 15 at-bats. Now, back to the motivation piece. I would forewarn the team, the players, at least twice. I would forewarn them the week of and then the morning of those 4 games or 3 games, that long day. I would boldly forewarn them that it's going to be a long day and they're going to be there the entire day, etc. But I would also tie in a message of how fortunate they would be to be out there on the baseball field playing a great game. And if the fields are nice, playing on nice fields, playing outside on a nice day, highlight the benefits and maybe throw in a message of, hey, could be a lot worse, right? There's kids in other countries that would kill to play on a field like this and play 4 games, have umpires, have a scoreboard. So if you forewarn them and don't sugarcoat it, then their expectations are a little more aligned with reality. You could also talk about getting a good night's sleep before. Maybe if you're going to do 4 games on a Saturday, don't practice Thursday or Friday, or do a quick practice that week. So those are a couple things you could do to reduce some of the discontent of players and help keep them a little more motivated throughout the long day. So appreciate the email. Coach, you know who you are, and look forward to receiving emails from all of you. Again, you can do it on the contact page at 8020baseball.com, or you can email me directly, coachbo@8020baseball.com. Now, let's dive in to part 1 of our interview, our discussion with Coach Tommy Hansen, certified strength and conditioning coach with a heavy focus on youth athletes. Part 2 will come out next week. Tommy is the owner of Perform for Life. He's based out of Illinois. He went to Bellevue University. He interned at TCU, and they have a fantastic strength and conditioning program for their baseball team there, one of the best in the country. I will put his contact information in the show notes. Some of the questions I asked Tommy are, what age do you recommend baseball players start incorporating structured strength training into their routines? Does he recommend one-on-one training sessions, small groups, or full team training sessions? What are the pros and cons of each? Does he tailor strength programs differently for different positions in baseball? He'll also discuss and answer the question, what are the key exercises or key movements that he believes are essential for youth baseball, that are most important to train up for youth baseball players? And we'll cover some other things too. So with that said, let's dive into part 1 of the interview with Coach Tommy Hansen. I am here with Coach Tommy Hansen. Coach, how you doing?
Good, man. Glad to be back. Been a while.
Oh, I'm pumped to have you back on. And I think your message is golden, and it's just what the youth baseball and youth sports world needs. What's new?
I don't remember the timing exactly of when we spoke last, but now at the time, I believe I was leasing like space at a different commercial gym. So as we speak now, I have my own facility. So I got a little more freedom to do a lot of the things that I wasn't able to do before at a different facility that I was at due to different traffic. Cause I was training at a commercial gym originally, but now I'm in my own space, kind of doing my own thing. I've got now my own batting cage. I do hitting lessons. So I'm doing a lot of different things that I wasn't doing prior. And I think when we originally spoke, I wasn't doing any of those things because of where I was at before. So a lot of big things have happened in the last year, and I'm kind of excited. Now I can spray off and do whatever I want, whether it's strength conditioning, baseball lessons, combine the both with some college athletes that I got that come in. So it's kind of been fun. So I kind of have it just set up to do what my heart desires here. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing that's happened since we've last spoke.
Awesome. Sounds like a great way to go about where you can combine the parts of baseball together, whether it's, hitting lessons with strength and conditioning. And in fact, I get that question a lot. How can coaches blend strength and conditioning or strength training, athleticism with the actual game, and how to kind of balance it? And sometimes having those pieces together, like having you as the coach, combining those together under one roof, I think could really be advantageous in a lot of ways. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. And I kind of think that's where strength conditioning is headed, because a lot in the past, it was kind of like, oh, you go to your sport coach for baseball practice, and then you go to your strength coach for lifting and athleticism. And I think there's been a big push for more of a blended model. And it's not saying that I'm going out and kind of I'm doing it all, but I'm trying to see where I can kind of fill some of the gaps and communicate with some of the coaches that my athletes are working with, and kind of use my background on different biomechanics and on some other fronts to communicate with them so that we're both achieving the same thing. But I know we can both learn from each other. And in the past, it's been very siloed. So I think that's kind of where the path is heading for strength conditioning, even in the youth sector as well. But I think that's kind of where the sweet spot is and where all the money's going to be made going forward. It's going to help a lot of kids out to kind of blend the two together.
Definitely. Yeah, it's going to be it may be a good fit for some players to have it all under one roof with you. And it may be a good fit to come over and do the strength and conditioning and that athleticism improvement with you, and maybe do something because of time constraints and practice constraints. So having some options, but I think having it, kind of just thinking of it as you said that, having you as a strength and conditioning coach actually coaching up the game of baseball or whatever sport it is really helppful, right? Because you're trying to build up better athletes for, sports in general, of course, but in certain cases, in specific cases, like say baseball. So knowing, the movements, being there right in the mix with those movements that hitters are doing in the cages. So let's hop in. I know you're giving us your time and I really appreciate it. I'm pumped to have you. I actually reached out, just so the listeners know, Tommy didn't reach out to me and say, hey, can I come back on your show? I do get requests to be on the show. I reached out to Tommy. I said, Coach Hansen, can I have you come on? I love your message. So I actually reached out to you and you immediately said yes. So I just want the listeners to know that's a big deal and super, super awesome on Tommy's part. With that said, I know your time is precious, like all of ours. So let's dive in. First question I got, we're going to come right out of the gate swinging here. What age do you recommend, young baseball players, youth baseball players, what age do you recommend they start incorporating a structured strength training routine or a strength training into their routine?
I think age is a tough measure to kind of pinpoint, but I kind of go on different behaviors. So for me, when I get questions from parents like, hey, do you think it's a good age to get them in there? For me, one, are they going to prove to me over time or at that time that they have some competency in some of the movements that I'm going to teach them? Because if you bring a kid that's way too young, that's 6 or 7, you tell them to do like a squat or like a hinge and some other things, some of them will have a real difficult time picking that up. And at that age, it's not that necessary. So for me, it's like, are they, one, going to be able to show competency and improvement in what we're doing? And the second one is, are they not forced by their parents to be there, and that they show at least a little bit of an interest to want to be there? And so usually at that age, the kids aren't seeking it out themselves. So it is going to be the parents that kind of push them towards it. But I think the big part is that even though their parents are kind of pushing them in the door, over the first few months, you should be able to see like, okay, this kid is genuinely interested in this stuff. And usually I'll start kids age range anywhere from, usually I like 5th or 6th grade as a good starting point just to teach some different foundation principles. But I've had kids as early as 1st grade come in and absolutely kill it. And they pick up how to do a squat well, how to do push-ups well, some of the different speed stuff. So, I mean, it really depends on the kid. And so usually I give most kids a chance when they come in to kind of prove themselves a little bit. And if some kids drift away, I'm like, you know what, maybe you should wait a year and come back because they're not really showing much of an interest. Yeah, we can try to push them and make it fun to get them interested. But I like to try to start them out on a really good note. And if their first impression is when they're way too young and they don't like to be there necessarily, that's going to give a bad first impression. And maybe down the road, they won't be so motivated to get back in and do it, even when they should be doing it. So I think it's more of a kind of wait and see and observe how they handle it the first few months approach. But in general, I'd say roughly fifth grade, maybe a year younger. And then in middle school, for sure, if they can get in there, just to teach them how to do it. So when they fully mature and they get to high school, they can hit the ground running. But that's kind of a general rule that I follow.
Love it. You have, that kind of typical range that you might look to have players start, but it really comes down to interest and competency. And I love where your mindset's at, Tommy, on that. And I think all of us as coaches, even though and a lot of us are not strength and conditioning coaches, most of the listeners aren't. And taking that mindset with everything in life with kids, just kind of feeling it out and don't force it. Sometimes, they need a nudge, but we don't want to force it. I really like that. So do you recommend one-to-one training sessions, small groups, full team trainings? What are the pros and cons of each of those?
Are you talking about in specifically youth training or just in general?
Yeah, well, let's say specifically like youth sports, youth athlete, youth baseball training.
So I would say 99% of the time I'm pushing kids towards groups because it's really the only reason is that it's really hard to keep a kid entertained with themselves for an hour. Because in my experience, when I first started out, so when I first started my business, I did have one-on-ones, and that's because I only had a few clients at the time. But when I brought those kids in, I could get the stuff that I needed done relatively quickly. But I noticed that like if I gave them a squat or a push-up or something like that, they kind of got bored just doing it on their own. And I had to try to make it fun, make it a competition. I mean, it made me better as a coach because I found different ways to navigate it. But I found myself spinning my wheels a little bit like, hey, like this kid would do so much better if he just had a few kids in here with him. And so it's not like especially at that age, you don't need one-on-one attention because you don't need to be that specific with your training. You don't need to get like, if you have two sixth graders, you're not going to see two different sixth graders and be like, hey, they need X training and this athlete needs Y training. They're both going to need very basic things and to show that they're learning and they're showing improvements in all the different core principles that we have. And so I'm almost always pushing kids towards that group environment. And so they thrive much better in it too, because the energy is so much better. But I'll also say there are a few kids where if they are generally interested and their parents are generally interested, but like right now I've got a kid that I do have one-on-one training with, but he's very, very far behind with his motor skills. And so if I throw him in a group, he might be embarrassed because he's so far behind the other kids. So there are environments and situations where that is warranted. But in general, if your kid can compete and keep up pretty well with a group, I would 100% recommend that you do it in groups. Otherwise, you're going to be just trying to find ways to entertain the kids. And I mean, I've done things from just bring out random technologies so that they can see their numbers to make things into a game. But in general, all those things can be fixed if you just have a few other kids in the group. So that's usually where I stick to.
I love your mindset, your paradigm on it. You have your kind of by and large, your general approach, but you're not afraid and you're definitely more than willing and looking to adjust and be malleable with how you coach up. Because like the example you gave with the player that maybe they're so far behind that it would be disadvantageous to have them in a group. I love that answer. Now, speaking of, tailoring, do you tailor the strength programs differently for different positions in baseball? With youth players, is there any benefit with a different type of program for strength and conditioning for different positions, like a pitcher or a position player or a catcher or an outfielder?
For youth training, no, there's nothing different. When it comes to high school and pro and more advanced athletes, there might be some slight differences, but in general, I'd say across the board, the training is actually very, very similar, especially in the weight room. When it goes to the skill side, and that's what we were talking about just at the beginning, where skill meets strength and conditioning, where those coaches are talking to each other in different disciplines, that's where that blend is going to happen. But in general, for youth training, I'm not training the kids really any different. So for me, if you look at like exit velo versus throwing velocity, a lot of that's just going to come from one, lower body strength, lower body power, and then body weight. That's going to be the majority of your exit velo and your throwing velocity. And then how will you use that through your mechanics and a little bit of upper body strength as well in your sequencing? That's what's going to matter the most. And that's where that blend is between sport and strength coach. But in general, from the weight room, we're going to work on getting stronger at the lower body, more powerful with the lower body, quick in our speed work and our jumps. Just create the biggest engine that we possibly can, and then refine the mechanics on the skill side. And that's what's going to put together the puzzle. So in general, no, there might be a few differences, like I said, in college and pro on some different things, depending on injury history and some other stuff. But in general, it's actually pretty close across the board, I'd say, at all levels.
Awesome. You mentioned a few kind of overarching categories of things that you do within the program. And I don't expect you to go through your whole program on here. Plus on a podcast on audio, it's difficult. But what are some key exercises, maybe a couple key exercises or movements that you believe are essential for youth baseball players? And maybe what would be a good way to train?
For the kids, the big thing is do compound movements, which just mean multi-joint movements, and just get really, really good at that and progressively overload that. So for instance, for my kids, I make sure they squat very well, first technique wise, and then we start adding load once they start begging me to put more weight on. So like when you're a kid, and we know kids' brains adapt to new skills very, very quickly as opposed to adults. So their brains are very plastic, meaning they take in information and can utilize that information and learn very quickly. That approach also applies with the strength conditioning aspect. So for me, there's times you can put 50 to 75 pounds on a kid's squat in a matter of 3-4 months, and probably even sooner than that, just because the competency of the lift gets really, really good. And so for me, if a kid's really hesitant, I'll be like, okay, we're going to learn to squat. I'll give you a 25-pound dumbbell. They'll do it 10 times. I was like, actually, that's way easier than I thought. Can I try 35? Sure. 45? Sure. And you kind of move up. Once they get really, really competent with it, that's when you as a coach can kind of be like, okay, I'm going to start monitoring your load a little bit more. But in general, if you give them a squat, you give them some sort of push-up or bench press variation, whether it's with a bar or with dumbbells, it really doesn't matter. Get them really good at chin-ups and pull-ups, and then have them run as fast as they possibly can for 20 to 30 yards a few times a week, and have them jump at max intensity. If you do those things 2 to 3 days a week through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, you're going to see some pretty massive differences just from compounding and learning, and just the compound interest of those inputs every week adding up over a long period of time. And the big issue with a lot of kids is that parents will put them in a strength conditioning program, and then their schedules get so hectic that they're like, oh, we want to train 4 or 5 days a week this month, but then next month we're out because we're traveling. And that's when the fluctuation in scheduling kind of ride this wave of like a little bit of results, back down to baseline, a little bit of results, back down to baseline. So the consistency, I'd rather have a kid go 2 to 3 days a week for 3 years than be on and off and kind of hits training really hard for 4 or 5 days a week, especially as a young kid. Do it 2 or 3 days a week. It only has to be 45 minutes. If you check those boxes that I just said, squat, push, pull, hinge, whatever exercises you choose do not matter. As long as they get better at those and eventually they can push themselves, you're going to be in a really good spot in a few years.
What about 1 day a week? So let's say you have a kid that's, in the middle of the season or really busy. Would 1 day a week be worth it?
Absolutely. So I have kids that do that. And even with that, a lot of those kids, a lot of those kids that do that oftentimes will have some different equipment at home themselves that they just kind of sprinkle in some stuff when they see fit at home. So like they'll have one good training session with me so I can monitor them and be like, hey, this is looking good. If you're at home doing this, make sure you push yourself. So even if it's just one really good sound training session with a coach, and then on their own with their parents, they do another day out of the week, you're still going to be in a really good spot. Just finding ways to make it present, even if it's only 1 day a week, can still work wonders long-term. So just get it in, be consistent with it, and things will happen.
Now, do you consider that a sign of a good strength and conditioning coach, a well-rounded program, somebody who gives their athletes a routine, something they can do at home? Do you feel like that's an essential part of a well-rounded program for those that can't get in consistently?
Yeah, it's a slippery slope to kind of go down, though, because if you give out too much, then people might keep asking for more, and then they kind of drift away from your program, and then you're giving out a lot of your services for free. So you do have to make sure you protect yourself in that. But as a coach, you can give general guidelines, and that's what I do. So if they want something to do at home, I won't give them like sets and reps and go do this with this rest time. I won't provide like a detailed plan like that, but I'm like, hey, you know how to squat, you know how to do push-ups, you have dumbbells, you know how to dumbbell bench and overhead press. Do that a few times a week. And here's kind of a few sets and reps you can stick into. But if you do a few more, I don't care. But just make sure you get it done. You know what you do here. And if things aren't working well, I come back in and I can give you a new exercise and you go home and do it. So it's kind of like general guidelines. And I think a lot of coaches sometimes will take that to their ego and be like, hey, the kid, they don't value my services enough to stay here, and they just want to do stuff at home because they think they can get the same benefit. They can. If the kids are doing really, really well, you can trust them to go out and do their own thing. And for me as a coach, the number one thing for you should be, are you seeing progress with your athletes? And however that's happening, it doesn't really matter. So for me, I don't see it as an attack on me or attack on my business when someone says, oh, we had to drop from 3 days to 1 day and we're going to do stuff at home. I don't see that as an attack at all, because they're still showing that they're trying to get better. And if they're getting better on their own, that's also a compliment to you as a coach because you've taught them how to be independent. So one, you got to be careful with how much you give out, but at the same time, you should be proud of yourself that you provided a good enough service to where they're now independent and can advocate for themselves outside of your training sessions.
I love the term slippery slope. When I hear that, that kind of goes with all the answers that I hear from you, Tommy, that I really just like where you're coming from. It's not this or that. It's multifactorial. There's a lot of variables. And I love when I hear slippery slope because you're right. It's not just all pros or all cons. So what are your thoughts just in general on bulking up versus athleticism, the pros and cons or the trade-offs?
So when it comes to like youth training, when it comes to lifting, because kids are still developing, if you lift heavy and you lift a lot, those kids aren't going to bulk up as a result of the lifting. So honestly, what you do, you just got to make sure that if you're lifting heavy with the kids, that they have already proven to you that they can handle it and that they're competent enough to do it. And so we hear that all the time. We say, oh, we don't want kids to lift too heavy. It's going to stunt their growth or they're going to get bulky. All these things that we hear, if done the right way, the heavy lifting is not the culprit or not the perpetrator of that. What the issue is that when you combine very unhealthy habits outside of the weight room, in a sense of like, if these kids are eating really, really bad foods and they're getting overweight and they're combining that with a lot of stress from unnecessary and unsupervised lifting, the combination of that can be negative and consequential for them. So the lifting itself, if they're a healthy young kid and they're supervised the right way, they're not going to get bulky from doing that. Like that's not going to happen. Now, when it comes to like the older kids, so when we look at like pitching velocity and hitting velocity, especially pitching, because I had a Division I pitcher that trained with me all off season. When he first started training with me a few years ago, he's 6'5", so he's a tall kid, but he only weighed about 100-ish pounds. So he was very thin for being 6'5". And so for him, and as we know, for throwing velocity, a lot of it is lower body strength and a lot of it is just lower body mass and mass in general. So everyone always says mass equals gas. That's 100% true up to a certain point. If you look at most major league pitchers, unless you got your real thin, tall, whippy pitchers, maybe like a Chris Sale or somebody like that, most of the guys you're looking at are going to be 210 minimum and up to 240 pounds on the mound. There is value of being a larger pitcher. Now, you don't have to go CC Sabathia mode and get as big and bulky as him, but in general, you have to have some lower body size. And so for him, his name, he pitches at Western Illinois. He came in and he trained with me 4 days a week this summer. And so he came in, he was probably about 200 pounds. So we put 30 pounds on him in a matter of 2 years. And he came back in and he's going into his senior year. And I told him, hey, if you want to still, because his velo has slowly crept up, the more body weight he's gotten. And I'm like, hey, you're in your senior year now. Like this is all or nothing. We got to get you to a certain size. And it's not just the size. He's been doing a really good throwing program that's helped too, but he's always been pretty underweight for his size. And so we took him in a matter of 8 weeks from 200 to almost 215, 216. So that's 2 pounds a week. That's a decent amount every week. And so I would consider that a decent bulk, but he was eating relatively good foods while he was doing it. And we were pounding the weights so that he was building muscle mass in accordance to what he was doing. And so there is a time and place that you do want to put on some weight, but if we're keeping this discussion with the youth, it's not really a concern you got to worry about unless if you have really unhealthy habits outside of the weight room, whether it's nutrition, the kids don't sleep very well, they don't drink water, and they're just unhealthy, then you might run into some issues. But in general, I wouldn't worry about lifting that heavy. You don't need to max out kids, but if they want to challenge themselves a little bit and lift a little bit heavier and do it a few times a week, there's no harm doing that.
Appreciate the thorough answers that you're giving. That's wonderful. All right, that wraps up part 1 of our interview with Coach Hansen. Part 2 will come out next week, and we'll dive right into the interview next week, right off the bat. An easy way to help this podcast, support the podcast, is to leave a review on your podcast app. Probably get that done in less than 5 minutes, and that really helps out the podcast. So I'd appreciate that if you wouldn't mind taking 3 or 4 minutes, leave a quick review. A review would be awesome. And so until next week, let's all take care of our health so we can be there to take care of our families, our close friends, and those baseball players that we are positively influencing. Take this information, implement it, get it going, put it into action, and I think you'd be pleasantly surprised where you end up as a coach and where your players end up with their growth and improvement. All right, everyone, you take care. Until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.